Welcome to Railway Engineering. My name is Dr. Mark Taylor, lecturer in Civil Engineering. So this is Unit 9, and in this unit we're going to look at rail management and maintenance. So this is Unit 9 of 10. In this unit we're going to look at the various authorities that safely manage and maintain the operation of the railways. So in this session I aim to describe the evolution of railway organisation in Britain, discuss the current structure of the railway in Britain, provide examples of the current international railway organisational approaches, and provide an introduction to railway safety culture and processes. Finally, I'm going to discuss the challenge of maintaining the UK rail network. So at the end of this session, you should be able to argue the advantages and disadvantages of private and state railway ownership, describe case law used to regulate the railways, discuss the European Union's vision for operation of the railway across countries, and understand the basic principles of managing railway safety. Finally, you should be able to appreciate the nature of the work involved in maintaining the UK rail network. First of all, we're going to look at the evolution of railway organisation in Great Britain. By 1833, the Stockton and Darlington Railway had become entirely steam operated, and it gradually began to resemble a modern railway. The S&DR Company became the sole train operator in the line. Parallel double tracks were built for trains travelling in opposite directions. Timetables were established, and a crude signalling system was established to prevent collisions. These methods of operation became standard on railways across the world. The S&DR proved a huge financial success, and paved the way for modern rail transport. The expertise that Stephenson and his apprentice Joseph Locke gained in the railway construction and locomotive building on the S&DR enabled them a few years later to construct the Liverpool and Manchester Railway, the first purpose-built steam railway, and also his revolutionary rocket locomotive. In Great Britain, railways were originally built by private ventures. Railways required Acts of Parliament. However, there was an awful lot of corruption and self-interest. Land ownership and competition with canal traffic presented big issues for the railways. There was also a level of naivety about the potential national importance of railway as a mode of transport. So a lack of planning and regulation led to duplicate lines, multiple stations in cities, unprofitable routes, speculative routes, questionable safety practices, poor conditions for travellers, for example third class, unaffordable fares for many, and poor working conditions for those that had to actually work on the railways. So you'll recall this photograph from my first lecture. The Canberra Junction in Montrose, the scene of the famous race to the north. So was this in the best interests of passengers? So the Armagh rail disaster occurred on the 12th of June 1889, and we've talked about this previously. This was the greatest rail disaster in Europe until then, and still ranks historically as by far the worst in Ireland and the fourth worst in the UK. So this led to a demand for government to intervene in railway operation. So one of the most significant interventions was the Regulation of Railways Act of 1889. And the measures contained in the Act were mandatory introduction of fixed block signalling, the mandatory introduction of interlocking of points and signals, the mandatory introduction of continuous breaks for staff, the creation of a means to finance such measures by issuing debenture stock, mandatory submission to the Board of Staff regarding overtime levels, the introduction of penalty charges for passengers without tickets, and the requirement to print a fare on every ticket issued. So this is still the Act under which you'll be prosecuted if you don't have a ticket in the UK, even today. It's unlikely that railway companies would have introduced these measures without a law. And if you want to look at this Act of Parliament, you can find it on legislation.gov.uk. So during the First World War, the running of the railways was taken over by the government to support the war effort. For the first time, many women were employed in the industry. The railway system was severely strained, and the system was left in a very poor state at the end of the war. So eventually it was realised that it was advantageous to reduce the number of companies that were running the railways. Full nationalisation was considered, but this was rejected. The Railways Act of 1921 created the Big Four companies, each responsible for a region, and these were the London, Midland and Scottish, known as the LMS, the LNER, the London and North Eastern Railway, the GWR, the Great Western Railway, and SR, the Southern Railway. So these companies had little competition with each other, but more competition with the road transport provision. Tariffs imposed on rail transport made it difficult to compete with the roads. The rail companies were undercut for profitable traffic, and these private rail companies ultimately made little or no profit at all. And then in 1939 the Second World War started. This again saw the use of the railways for the war effort, but it also saw the German Luftwaffe destroy a lot of the railway infrastructure in the UK. So the railways were left in a very bad state after the Second World War. Along with many other national utilities, the railways were then nationalised. The decline continued due to the rapid growth of road transport. Investment was undertaken, but was often poorly focused, and the railways became a massive financial drain on the public finances. So Richard Beeching was born in 1913 and died in March 1985. He was commonly known as Dr. Beeching. He was an industrial chemist who had previously headed ICI, and he was on loan from that organisation with a remit to sort out the problem of the railways. For a short but very notable time, he was chairman of British Railways. He became a household name in Britain in the early 1960s for his report, The Reshaping of British Railways, commonly referred to as the Beeching Report, which led to far-reaching changes in the railway network, popularly known as the Beeching Acts. So as a result of the report, just over 4,000 route miles of track were removed from the system on cost and efficiency grounds, and this left Britain with 13,721 miles of railway lines in 1966. A further 2,000 miles were lost by the end of the 1960s. The report identified profitable and unprofitable services and revealed great unevenness in the use and profitability of the railways. It recommended the widespread closure of uneconomical routes. Initially, Harold Wilson's Labour government continued with the policy of closing uneconomic lines, although it came under increasing pressure from the backbenchers. In 1966, a white paper on the transport policy identified economic utility rather than commercial viability as a major objective of a railway policy, and this resulted in the revised railway network plan with 3,000 miles of additional track surviving Beeching's scheme. Following a policy review in 1967, the Transport Act of 1968 made provision for major capital reconstruction on the railways and deficit relief. Certain routes that fulfilled an important function but were not financially viable were subsidised. The carriage of freight by road and rail was to integrate under the National Freight Corporation. So Beeching's mandate was to make the railways pay. The question he asked was how much of the railway can ultimately be made to pay. His objective was to eliminate those parts of the system which were obviously unsound. The British Railways Board had had it in mind that its duty is to employ the assets vested in it and develop or modify them to the best advantage of the nation. And the nature of the problem, they commented in 1955, the modernisation plan did not envisage any basic changes to the scope of the railway services and the general mode of operation. So you can see a comparison of the rail network in 1900 compared to what the network would have looked like if the Beeching proposals had been implemented in full. You can see from these images that the coverage of the national network would have been substantially reduced. Note that some of the lines up in the West Highlands of Scotland would have been closed. These don't just serve local communities, but they also provide great attractions for tourists during the summer months. So Dr. Beeching did not succeed in making the railways pay overall, but modernisation led to an improved system, particularly with freight through the containerisation system. It showed that railways have a social benefit, not just a financial one. And British Rail later achieved some success in the form of Intercity and Network South East and the delivery of efficiency. By the early 1980s, passenger decline had been arrested. So this figure shows the number of passengers using the railway between 1830 and 2015. So what do you think is happening at these points in the chart? The introduction of the car, world wars, the Hatfield accident. But notably you'll see in 1995 a rise in passenger use due to privatisation of the railways. So we're now going to examine how the railways are currently organised in the UK. So the Conservative government fundamentally changed the structure of the railways in 1993. The Railways Act of 1993 led to the private ownership of all aspects of the railway. A single public entity, British Rail, was broken into an infrastructure company known as Railtrack, and 25 passenger train operating companies or TOCs, 5 freight operating companies FOCs, and 3 rolling stock leasing companies or ROSCOs. The House of Commons Library has got an excellent note on the privatisation of the railways from 1987 to 1996. So train operating companies initially had commercial franchise contracts with the government, but these were scrapped during the 2020 pandemic. A train operating company is a company or business that operates passenger trains on the railway system of Great Britain. TOCs have existed since the privatisation of the network under the Railways Act of 1993. The government recently announced the end of rail franchising and introduced emergency recovery management agreements. The Secretary of State for Transport, Grant Shapps, stated that the model of privatisation adopted 25 years ago has seen significant rises in passenger numbers, but the pandemic has proven that this is no longer working. Chris Birchall, the Managing Director of Arriva Trains UK, a TOC, said that now more than ever it's crucial that the railways are further reformed and modernised to meet the challenges faced long into the post-pandemic future. He said a new public-private partnership is key to achieving this, one which fully leverages the private sector's record of attracting people to travel by rail and supports public finances. However, the RNT General Secretary Mick Cash said that the government must now ditch its obsession with free market and call to a halt any attempts to reanimate the corpse of rail privatisation. So train leasing companies, or rolling stock leasing companies or ROSCOs, own most of the coaches, locomotives and freight wagons on the rails, which they hire out to train and freight operating companies. ROSCOs have replaced many of the older trains that were being used before privatisation with modern vehicles. They're often responsible for the maintenance and rebuilding of the vehicles they hire out. Leasing companies include Angel Trains Limited, Beacon Rail, Caledonia Rail Leasing, Halifax Asset Finance, Lombard North Central and Porterbrook Leasing Company Limited. So in relation to open access licences, there are 2 types of train operator running passenger services in Great Britain. Franchised operators hold contracts with the government to run services, while open access operators work independently of and often compete with franchises. Open access operators such as Hull Trains and Grand Central introduce competition, which has been shown to deliver benefits to passengers. So finally, Network Rail are regulated by the Office of Rail and Road for their stewardship of the rail infrastructure, and this is under a scheme of regulatory licences. The Office of Rail and Road is independent economic and safety regulator for Britain's railways. It has a range of statutory powers to set the contractual and financial framework within which they operate the rail network. It sets the targets they have to achieve, reports regularly on their performance, ensures they're carrying out their activities efficiently and well, and also that they're appropriately funded. So the Rail Accident Investigation Branch, or the RAIB, is a statutory body which investigates accidents and it reports directly to the government. The Rail Safety and Standards Board, the RSSB, is a not-for-profit independent company and it works to improve health and safety on the railways. It also manages rail group standards. The Association of Train Operating Companies represents the interests of the TOCs and it coordinates revenue allocation. It also operates rail inquiry services and rail cards. And finally, the British Transport Police is a dedicated police force for the railways. It's responsible for crime prevention. So we're now going to look at current international thinking.
You like trains? Paris-London takes you 2 hours seated in a comfortable compartment. Your goods cover 11,000 kilometres, twice as quickly as by ship. And the ecologist inside you smiles at the thought that you are using one of the greenest means of travel on the market. You think that is excellent? But we are here to tell you it could be much better, provided that it is transformed into a standardised, competitive and better managed sector. Track 1. Promote interoperability. In other words, allow trains to move through and across all of Europe without any technical, regulatory or operational constraints. Because at the moment, the signalling changes virtually from one country to the next. The Thales PBK, for example, goes across 7 different types of signalling zones. Oh, 7 zones? That's cool. That happens to be the number of chakras. Ah yes, except that a single standard would be much simpler and above all cheaper. Because at the moment, the losses due to reauthorization of trains in different countries are measured in millions. But where was I? Ah yes, at track 2. Separate the railway operators from the network managers. Think about it. Airports are not managed by airlines, and neither are motorways managed by road hauliers. So why should it be different for rail? Que viva la separación! Precisely. What's more, this would improve the train's punctuality. Just like opening up the railway market to competition will guarantee a wider choice of services. And who says a wider choice of services also says satisfied and happy users? And that's track 3. This, according to our information, would be appreciated by a very large number of you. Ultimately, it would just take a few reforms to transform a labyrinth of national services into a single European railway network, the railway network of the future.
So the EU vision for the European railways was the creation of an integrated European railway area to allow cross-border services under a single responsibility in order to guarantee the quality of services to the customer. And this included 3 key themes: interoperability, separate infrastructure from operators, and finally competition. So I want you to stop and have a think about what the barriers are to the EU's rail vision. So the European Union has been introducing legislation to reduce the role of the state in the railway, open up and harmonise rail across the continent. The legislation has been introduced in packages between 2001 and 2016. So the first package, member states are required to ensure that organisations operating the infrastructure and those operating the services are separate and run on a commercial basis. The second railway package was to promote common standards and open access, working towards an integrated European railway area. The third package was harmonised licences for train drivers, open access and subsidised public services and rail passenger rights. The fourth railway package was standards and authorisation for rolling stock, workforce skills, independent management of infrastructure and the liberalisation of domestic passenger services. So the Trans-European Transport Network policy addresses the implementation and development of a Europe-wide network of railway lines, roads, inland waterways, maritime shipping routes, ports, airports and railway terminals. The ultimate objective is to close gaps, remove bottlenecks and technical barriers, as well as to strengthen social, economic and territorial cohesion in the European Union. Besides the construction of new physical infrastructure, the 10T policy supports the application of innovation, new technologies and digital solutions to all modes of transport. The objective is improved use of infrastructure, reduced environmental impact of transport, enhanced energy efficiency and increased safety. So 10T comprises 2 network layers. The core network includes the most important connections, linking the most important nodes, and is to be completed by 2030. The comprehensive network covers all European regions and is to be completed by 2050. So interoperability is a European initiative enabling the railway to compete more effectively with other forms of transport. It reduces costs plus provides safe and uninterrupted movement of trains across Europe by establishing common standards and assessment processes. The interoperability project has seen massive delays occur in the certification of equipment, and this means big risk up front for operators, so it doesn't make great business sense. The national rules vary massively, and this is also a big issue. The European Rail Agency was established to harmonise rules and approvals, and this is going to have increasing responsibilities going forward. The national safety authorities will become regional offices for the ERA for cross-border services. So the separation of infrastructure is already in place in the UK, also in Sweden, Norway, Denmark and the Netherlands. The EU has pursued legal action against other member states to comply, and this has seen much resistance from unions and workforce. The fourth package now allows infrastructure and services to be owned by a single holding company. So this photograph shows 3 private train operators at King's Cross Station in London. Passengers here have a choice of operator for some, but not all stations. The middle and right-hand trains receive no government subsidy. So Hong Kong operator MTR proposes to run trains in Sweden. At the moment, MTR in Hong Kong comprises 10 commuter railway lines, a light rail network, an airport express link and a high-speed rail service connecting Hong Kong to mainland China. MTR carries about 5.9 million passenger journeys locally on an average weekday. MTR has extensive end-to-end railway experience with more than 40 years of railway projects experience from design, planning and construction, through to commissioning, maintenance and operations. Going beyond railway delivery and operation, MTR also creates and manages dynamic communities around its network through seamless integration of rail, commercial and property developments. So I want you all to have a think about what the benefits and disbenefits of private versus state ownership are. So we're now going to look at how we manage health and safety in the railway sector. So Network Rail has 6 key themes in its strategic management of health and safety. These include safety in the community, which makes sure that passengers and other members of the public understand how to stay safe. And then they consider their workforce and safety of all employees and contractors that work for them. And then they consider improving safety standards in any upgrade plans that they undertake. They then have safety assurance systems, which ensure anybody who comes into contact with the business is safe. They then have safety performance systems, where they look at how they measure safety performance throughout the organisation. Then finally, they have railway safety campaigns, which raise safety awareness on the railway for the general public. So one of the Network Rail health and safety mantras is everyone home safe every day. So to work on the railways, you have to undertake what's called personal track safety training. In the days of old, you would get a PTS card to demonstrate that you've undertaken this training, but in 2014 that system was replaced with a Sentinel smart card system. These new cards provided access to a database of information regarding the operative by using a QR code on the card itself. The scheme ensures that those working on the infrastructure are competent, medically fit and have authority to do so. The course is intended for candidates who wish to work on or near Network Rail's infrastructure. The training also requires a medical and drug and alcohol screening. The test ensures that the candidate correctly interprets the relevant parts of the rulebook, the track safety handbook, and understands the relevant aspects of the Sentinel scheme. They must also demonstrate understanding of the ability to follow a safe system of work that the controller of site safety or the COS will establish on site. So one of the biggest health and safety risks that Network Rail has is the driving of vehicles to get to site to access the railway. Network Rail operate a fleet of 7,500 vehicles, covering in excess of 100 million miles per year. The Management of Occupational Road Risk project aims to reduce road accidents. Another hazard is staff being struck by trains whilst either maintaining, enhancing or renewing the railway. Another issue is fatigue. Flexible hours around the clock to keep the railway operating mean that staff often have to travel long distances to get to work or work disruptive and sometimes very long hours, which can all lead to fatigue. So a fatigue management standard is in place to help staff and managers reduce excessive working hours. There are 3 trade unions that support staff in the rail sector. These are the Rail and Maritime Union, the Transport Salaried Staffs Association and the Unite Union, and they help provide input from staff to help improve safety performance. The Sentinel process, or Sentinel system, ensures that employees are competent in the duties they perform. The Principal Contractor Licensing Scheme ensures consistent contractor operations. The Plant Operations Scheme ensures a safe planning, control and use of track plant and equipment. There is also a system for reporting close calls so that risks can be removed before causing injury. So we're now just going to look at railway maintenance, but not on a nuts and bolt detail level, at more of a strategic level, and consider some of the overarching issues and challenges that Network Rail have. So railhead treatment trains are sent out during autumn in the period of September to December, where there's frequent leaf fall onto the railway tracks. And these leaves fall onto the rails and are crushed by passing trains, and this eventually causes wheels to slip. These adhesion problems mean that trains slip and need to travel slower on approaches to stations, and occasionally have problems leaving stations, and this leads to cancellations of services as well as wheel flats on trains. The railhead treatment trains spray water onto the rail heads, and the high pressure jets blast away the leaf debris from the rails. The UK RHTT trains are hauled by diesel or electrodiesel locomotives, in addition to Network Rail's MPVs or multi-purpose vehicles. So Network Rail has over 20,000 miles of track across the UK. They have almost 6,000 level crossings and 30,000 bridges and viaducts, and over 2,500 stations. And when you consider great Scottish structures like the Forth Bridge and the Glenfinnan Viaduct, you can get a feel for the challenge that we have in maintaining this old infrastructure. There's nothing wrong with this old infrastructure, it's perfectly serviceable, but it needs a lot of tender loving care. It also needs close inspections to ensure that it's safe to use on the network. So Network Rail have a fleet of measurement trains, and these traverse the country, travelling over all the track measuring and monitoring the condition of the infrastructure. Reports are generated which help engineers make decisions about where to target maintenance. So that's the end of Unit 9, and in the next unit, Unit 10, we're going to look at metros and trams. In particular, we're going to focus on the Edinburgh Tram project and look at the civil engineering infrastructure that was constructed to allow that project to be realised. So thanks for watching, bye for now.